where lust for a whole life and nothing but less makes people jump out of a comfortable pond into an unknown ocean. Welcome to that journey between the East and the West. Who says Rolling Stones don't gather moss? Hello, everyone. I am Meenu Gupta, your host for the day, and I'm delighted to have you join me every week as amazing people share their incredible and inspiring life stories of straddling continents. Thank you. So, described as the egoless, frictionless self by his very famous wife, our guest for today is a true exponent of the term straddling continents between the East and the West. As the former Austrian ambassador to India and many other countries, he and his wife have straddled continents, managed their relationship, and brought up a family and managed their careers while living on two sides of the globe. So it is my deepest pleasure to introduce Dr. Herbert Traxl to all of you listening in today. Thank you, Herbert, for joining me. Thank you very much. Shovana and you, to me, represent the essence of an intercultural union. And I would like to begin our conversation with that.
I mean, it's perfect. Minu, I'm very happy to be on your program. I'm always happy to talk about my, say, two home. I'm always saying in a way, I'm standing on one foot, Vienna, and the second foot, Delhi. Like Shovana is standing on one foot, Delhi, her second foot, Vienna. I'm talking about 2 feet and 2 feet which brought us together. Minu, fine.
Okay, so we begin from the beginning. So, how and where did you meet? And when did you meet?
You see, the whole thing was, as many things in life, you never know when you come at something which later on changes completely your life in that one. I mean, I joined the Foreign Service and I had a first posting in Paris with a multilateral organization with our mission to that. And I was back in Vienna and, we have a system that we apply for postings. And there came up the posting of the number 2 at the embassy in Delhi. I'd never been outside Europe before that. And I thought, at the end, since I joined foreign relations and the diplomatic life, it's more than Europe. And I thought India would be most interesting. So I applied for that. I got it. And I had 4 very interesting years in Delhi in the second half of the 70s. Interested on one side in culture. I went to dancing performances without knowing that later on it would be more of dancing than I thought. I did a lot of sports at that time, and at Delhi, which in the 70s was a quiet Delhi, much smaller Delhi than today, and a bit more, I would say, laid back. And at a certain moment, a good friend of, now I'd say, of ours, who was in the circle of artists and all that, always said, Herbert, come, I've got a very good friend who is an established Kathak dancer, and come home. She will present Kathak to you. And we were about 40, 50 people in her house at that time. So I went there without any kind of forethought or something like that. What puzzled me first is when Shovana Narayan, when Shovana was introduced, she was introduced as somebody who has a master's in physics. I said, Kathak dancer, master's in physics. Interesting. Who is member of the Audits and Account Service in India. And I know that this is a rather selective group of that. So I thought it would be interesting to meet her. Point was, after the introduction, after her dancing, after her introducing Kathak, she disappeared through the back door. So in some way, I'm not going into all that, again, got together with her, and then we started to meet a couple of times. All that was end of 79, beginning of 80. So this is on what you were saying, how we met and how we came together.
And when did you guys then get married?
You see, we started to go out, we started to know each other better, and her and my consideration of marriage is something which is there for good. in that way, be it India, be it Austria, we were at the same level. For her, it was also the consideration marrying outside her up to then cultural circle and all that. We got married at the end 2 years later, 1.5 years later. I was posted back to Vienna. So we had about 1.5 years of distant relationship. She had come over once or twice. And finally, we got married in summer 1982. So we celebrated our 40th wedding anniversary a few months back.
As though that is 40th. That's long innings.
I was always saying we want to get older together. We are on the way to that. Of course, the wife never gets older, but the man gets older. So, tell me, what do you want to hear from me?
Two souls from different parts of the world meet and decide to unite in marriage. But how do they keep this marriage together if they are physically working in different continents? Did it really function well? Let's find out from a veteran. So for me, a question that comes up, which I'm sure must have definitely come up before both of you got married, you being posted in other places and she having, or at that time, living in India. How did you see the future rolling out in two different places?
You see, in a way, I mean, you're putting your finger on something very sensitive, important, which I actually know from a lot of colleagues of mine in Austria and other foreign services. How do you manage it in a marriage, in a partnership? What do you do? And I realized very soon that we will have to find our own way in that one. In the beginning, very naively, I told her, oh, tell your agent for your dancing that he should block your dances. And they said, agent? Good. There's no agent. Indian artists, and that I learned in the meantime, very prominent Indian artists don't have agents. It's all self-organized. Then I said, yeah, but you're fine, you can dance, but you are also a very highly qualified civil servant. You could work in an international organization in Vienna. I said, yeah, and where's my dance? I understood also very well that as much as we think in Vienna we are a hub of culture, but we are not a hub of Indian classical dance. So at the end, we said we'll find our own way. We were always also, now after 40 years, we were together, but very often together in mind, and we've tried to get as much time together as possible. My vacations, her vacations, she came to join me, I came to join her. When she joined me, I was working, but we were together. When I joined her, she was working with her. So we doubled up and we managed it on the distance. Everybody who is in a relationship with, you call it intercultural, I would say, on distance, has to find their own way. There's no general recipe. There's no general way how to do it. You have to find one, but the major thing is respect the situation of your partner, respect that she has also her character, her profession. You can't just tell her. Some people would join in, but you can't just tell somebody like who has got this background to stop doing what she had been doing. To answer you finally, after my many words on that, we found our own way and we did it now for quite a long time.
Which I understand. You've been doing it for a while. Would you say that when you were together, when both of you figured out your ways, when you could be together every year, would you say that there was, of course, then more quality time than an average couple would? Because what I see generally,
Yeah.
when people are together, they take each other for granted. And the spending of time together is not really so much of quality.
I'll tell you when I finally, as I told you, we got married in 82. And I got posted a second time to India in 97, 15 years later. And a lot of my friends in Vienna are saying, haha, now you'll see the daily life together, how difficult it is. But let's see how it's going to work out. It worked out well. I had a posting of close to 5 years, and where we were together like usually what you count like that. We even survived that. And we survive now when we sit on each other since I retired, and she as a dancer never retires, when I'm in India for a longer time. As I said, you have to respect the other. This is the major thing. You have to trust the other. You have to be confident and trust in the other, particular when you are separated by thousands of kilometers. One of the things which changed a lot today, as I said, we got married in 82. I was soon after that posted on my first ambassadorial posting to Africa. Now, in 82, 83, which was actually Ethiopian, that one, the telephone connection from Ethiopia to India was not very easy. You had to book your calls, you had to wait for your calls. Then at the end, it didn't come. You remind them, you say, yeah, so we'll be coming. You reminded them again. They said, what call, what you're talking about. Then also, at that time, since you had to book your call, there happened to come logically disagreements where you don't see eye to eye. Today, if you call by mobile, you put it down, you call back 5 minutes later. At that time, as I explained, when you had to go via a very unreliable, via extension, I mean, that was it. We had found out also our own ways of communications, which were that we spoke on an audio tape and sent each other audio tapes, which gave a lot of, say, it's letter writing is lovely. We all have lost the facility of writing letters, but we did it not only with letters, we did it with audio tapes. And audio tape, you sit down, you might take your glass of something and talk into a microphone, 20 minutes, half an hour, 45 minutes, tell the other about that. And how shall I say, the feeling of proximity, feeling of closeness is much, much stronger in that. Again, have to find your own ways, but keep respect, keep trust, keep confidence in each other.
That's amazing. So your audio tapes were like love letters, and you were sending them how and how often were they going then?
The audio tape we send every week.
That's so nice.
Again, you talk about what you do, how the things are. And so then later on, Shovana, of course, joined me everywhere for her vacation or something like that. As I said, audio tape was our way of doing it. I never liked so much the writing side of that. Writing letters is also a very emotional kind of thing.
It's a way of connecting, whether it's audio tape or love letters. It's a mode of expression for the other person to hear all about your feelings, what you're doing, and so on. That's very interesting. Distance really had no chance. Respect, trust, and confidence are the ingredients which kept the union of Herbert and Shovana alive. They found their own unique way of sharing emotions, thoughts, and events across the ocean with audio tapes. Amazing. For me, that was one of the most beautiful stories I ever heard. But how did they manage to bring up their offspring? And when you had Ishan, your son, how did that pan out?
Look, again, not easy for all of us, but the logic was there that Ishan stayed with his mother for the first 6 years, meaning he stayed with Shovana in Delhi, went to the kindergarten. Shovana sent him to the German kindergarten, but his first language actually was kitchen Hindi, then kitchen English, I would say Küchen Deutsch, kitchen German that way. And then we had said that school-wise, it fitted in with my postings. I took Ishan when he was 6 and took him to Vienna and put him into school here. As I said, no patent recipe.
Yeah, of course. All of us are individuals with a unique set of temperaments, parameters, and situations. So, very interesting. So, after he was 6, Ishan stayed in with you.
Ishan stayed with me. When I went on a posting again, he stayed with my older sister. We could have taken him along. We talked with him. And he said, no, no, you have put me into a good school here. So he stayed in Austria. But he has also become a very international person, married, transcontinental. But he is now in Vienna and settled in Vienna. He did studies abroad, but he's now settled in Vienna, working in private companies in Vienna, very interesting jobs. So in that way, and we tried to be as much with him, had him with us. Again, no patent recipe.
How did he feel about this unconventional way of growing up?
You would have to ask him. I mean, that's his feeling, there's all that. But he is again today a child of our time in that sense. He kept up speaking Hindi orally. I think he's quite fluent. I mean, I'm lousy. I just know a few words. And so he has this double identity of being an Austrian citizen, but having a very profound comprehension for, he had studied also in America, for politics, economics in a global sense and a global comprehension. I think it works out. Everybody has to find his way.
But when you were in India, because I know that you lived in a few other countries, I believe Thailand and Ethiopia, and there were some other countries, right?
Iran.
So now that you're married to a person of Indian origin or an Indian, really, in that sense, because Shovana is very steeped and she's rich with Indian culture. She's a very epitome of that. Did you, at coming from Austria, which has its own culture, for example, of music, etc., coming from Austria and being with Shovana from India, did you at any time feel that this culture is alien to me? I don't belong.
Very good question, that one. It was a new culture for me, but in the end, this, again, I always come back to my points of respect, tolerance, and trust in that one. I learned a lot through Shovana. She might also have learned a little bit through me. She knew about Western music, but she knows now much, much more than she knew before. I knew very little, to tell it, about Indian music, Indian classical music, Indian classical dance, literature in that way. And so I learned a lot through her. When you, as I did now for 40 years, live with a performing artist, you start to respect a lot. But at the same time, on a question about you and us, and she is that, and she has got that background, you have got that background. I come always with one example, which I said at the end, my skin might be white, my skin might be brown, my skin might be whatever. The blood under the skin is the same. At the end, an Indian classical dancer has to present and bring over to the audience, to the people who are watching, certain things, philosophies, actions, events. Same with us. You do it maybe in a different way, but I remember that was a good example. Shovana experimented quite a lot, not only in interaction between the different schools of Indian classical dance. She did a lot of that, but also going beyond that. So she had a lovely production with an Indian classical Kathak dancer and Viennese ballet dancer, one of the top artists of the Vienna Staatsoper, and a Spanish flamenco dancer. At the end, it clicked together, it merged lovely. What she explained to me to a certain extent was, when you go down from the hip feet movement, similar to flamenco, when you go up, movements like that, similar to ballet. The intention of art at the same time is always the same. The ways of presenting might be different.
Beautifully expressed. It's a method of expression.
The method of expression will be different. The instruments are different. The instrument is your leg, your arms, your body, but you might use it in a different way to bring over the same thing at the end, which is a story, adoration, beauty. That's the end of art. And that's what we want to have with that. As I said, I've learned a lot about Indian classical art. I'm still not the great expert of Kathak, but I think I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot also by reading the many books of Shovana about that. She just wrote a book on mythology and dance, which, of course, the emphasis on Indian classical dance, but also on other international dances where mythology gives substance to what they are presenting.
That's interesting. So she brought out mythology through dance.
Of course, we do it in ballet dancing, of course. We tell a story. A Kathak dancer tells a story. You tell a story, you embellish it by virtuosity, you embellish it by particular beautiful movements, but at the end, it's bringing something, story, ideas, ideas, beauty to the people.
And I know that you mentioned right at the beginning that this is, you had one foot in one continent and one foot in the other one. That's who you are. But in a sense of belonging, when what a person feels that, where do you belong? You belong to both, or you just say, okay, I'm okay with any place, or it happens to a lot of people, even though they might be living in different places, they somehow belong to one. It is a deep feeling which comes from the roots. So, how is that with you?
I'm at the end Austrian, and Shovana is at the end Indian. But you learn that we are at the end one global village. We've got this lovely saying in that one. So let's accept I have my identity, but I've learned to appreciate a lot, particularly the Indian identity, the Indian culture, the Indian civilization. But through that also, I've learned to appreciate the others. You might see, I mean, I as an Austrian, of course, I'm proud to be that, but I see our weaknesses. We are human beings, so we've got our problems, we've got our weaknesses, we've got, if you go back in history, things which could have gone differently. The same happens to others, but you have to accept the essence of the other. You have to accept the other has got their own identity, their own characteristics. What you have to hope for is as you accept the other should accept you. This is how Shovana and I lived now since we know each other now since how much is it, 42 and a half years or something like that. She is an Indian classical dancer. I grew up with European Viennese classical music. Again, to your question, this is my first leg. But my second leg is that I've learned more and more about India, about coming to appreciate it, about seeing its beauty, its strength, its identities. And that's how I think we have to live in our global village today. Today, when you just hop into a plane, if they're functioning, go within hours into a very different area. In earlier times, this would have been a shock for everybody. And for many people, when they go transcontinental, be it to this or that African or Asian country, they find it as a shock because they see the difference. I think what you have to see is not the difference. What you have to see that at the end, we are human beings behaving like other human beings are. And we should also have certain human values, appreciate life, appreciate the other one, appreciate freedoms, appreciate freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of all kind of beliefs in that. That's how you have to live. You have the differences, accept that, but find some ways how you can live despite differences with others.
Beautifully put, because right now the words diversity and inclusion have now taken over the global platform. And what you are saying is exactly that. In other words, there is diversity, and when you accept it, it is inclusion. When you find commonality, instead of just looking, differences exist, of course, but in the differences is where you find commonality. We are all human beings in a global village. The world is a global. I love that expression. The world is a global village. So beautiful, very nice. And the grandchildren right now would also be then being brought up in Austria, or they are somewhere else. Knowing Ishan, he was, I think, somewhere in the US, and they are in Austria, right?
He married an American, but they are living and both living and working in Austria. You never know. I mean, he has got a very good job, a very interesting job at the time. But you know, from your generation, something else might come up. I'm happy they are here. I'm happy they are not living far away from us here. So I've got the pleasure of seeing them and the children also quite often.
That's interesting, because that would be also interesting to bring out. Here we spoke about differences between the East and the West and the comparisons, the commonalities. But just now you mentioned something which is also a different way of, there is this aspect and there is this aspect. So coming from this aspect, when you said from this generation, when you use that, what would, there would be at East and West in the thought processes of generations. Now we're talking of time, not distance, and different countries. Now we're talking of time factor. So just give me your two bites on that, because coming from your viewpoint.
You see, in a way, humans have always traveled. Humans have changed. Humans have exchanged. Only our generation, and it's particular those last 200, 250 years, brought a different perception of distance of time. Look into the Indus Valley civilization and look that there are, I've been reading a lot of indication that Indus Valley civilization had contacts to Mesopotamian, this was the old Sumer and Babylonic civilization and that. It took a longer time, but people went from one to the other, exchange, did commerce. And now we are talking, as you know, Indus Valley civilization, we are talking about second and third millenary BC. Even at that time it happened. Today, you jump more or less from one country and one continent to the other. So time has changed, has given us more challenges, because in all the time the influence of others were never as quickly to be felt as it's being today. Distances have become much less. We'll have to live with that. The major thing is, at the end, we know there's also the revolution of information. We know so much more than when I'm thinking my parents, grandparents, and generations before. There was a lot of wisdom, but there was not so much information in quantity, in profoundness, as you have it today with us. Those are our challenges, those are our problems, those are our advantages, but they give us also difficulties to resolve. Shovana and I live, you were saying, and I think the topic of the conversation is intercultural relationship. We do that through that I live in that for a long time. I always tend to see more the similarities than the differences. I intend to see more that there are a lot of issues which we share than a lot of issues where we have contradicting views. I do hope I give that on to, okay, we have only one son, but we've got now three grandchildren. We, as much as we can pass it on to very, very small ones, one have to do that. Again, the world as one village, and people in that village should jolly well live better together than we have done for a long time, than we are doing now at the moment, unfortunately. But I'm not talking into politics. I'm not going into politics. But we have a time which was again very, very. We have a time we live in at the moment is very difficult. Find the commonalities and emphasize them.
Very well put, Herbert. Before we wrap up, I know you mentioned a lot of things, or a few things in between, about the world being a global village and mutual respect and relationships that I got. But as a final tier for the people, what would be the message that you would like to leave our audience with today?
Tolerance, respect, acceptance of others, with, of course, one requirement: not only one side can be tolerant, then it doesn't function. When you accept the identity of somebody else, they also will have to accept that you have got your identity in that. When you want to make peace, you need two sides to make peace. When you want to stop conflict, you need both sides to stop conflict. Otherwise, one side will prevail at the end. And I think at the end, I use the word now without thinking much of prevailing. Prevail should be accept also the other, and the other one accept me existing in that. That's my message at the end. Accept the others. Of course, there will be conflicts. Of course, there will be differences, but do it in a civilized, peaceful way. I worked for nearly 40 years in this field of diplomacy, and the end of diplomacy would always be resolve conflicts not by force, but by mutual acceptance.
Herbert not only philosophizes but practices. The world is one global village, he says, and his way of life and that of his families clearly shows that tolerance, respect, and acceptance of others with one requirement. It should be a two-way street. Wise words practiced both in his diplomatic career as well as in the private sphere. In the divided world we inhabit, his parting words resolve conflict with mutual acceptance, bring a finality to the discussions on diversity and inclusion that have suddenly gained prominence in this decade, despite having existed since times immemorial. Perfect. Thank you, Herbert, for joining me. It's been a real pleasure. I was very curious, and you belong to that class, and that I think you are one of the first few intercultural couples who managed to find their way in unique form and methods. Phenomenal. Thank you so much for joining me, Herbert, and I wish you a pleasant day.
Thank you very much, Meenu.
Namaste.
Namaskar.
And that, my dear listeners, is one of the most beautiful and heartwarming conversations that I have had lately. Did you notice something interesting? Herbert never mentioned the word love in the entire conversation. Yet, his and Shovana's coming together and remaining together in a unique way is not only one of the most romantic love stories that I have heard and seen, but also the most inspiring. Love is not just a Valentine's Day spoken word, but an enduring, lived-out philosophy based on mutual respect, trust, confidence, and sharing. And that is a life well lived and still continuing. Their marriage has withstood not only the test of time and distance, but also the apparent chasm between the Eastern and the Western cultures. But, as Herbert wisely pointed out, our skins may be of different colors, but the blood which flows through our bodies is the same red. Thank you for listening to the series Between the East and the West. Do subscribe to the channels mentioned on the site in case, of course, you liked what you heard. I am Meenu Gupta, the host of the series, and I'll be looking forward to your comments. We love feedback. Thank you once again. Namaste and bye-bye.